Welcome to today's Agricultural Sciences lesson. My name is Fezeka Zulu. This lesson is brought to you by the Northern Cape Department of Education in collaboration with Phakama Research and Development. We are still on our revision, paper 1 revision. That is for topics, that is animal nutrition, animal production, protection and control, as well as animal reproduction. On our previous lessons, we have already covered the animal nutrition as well as the animal production, health and control. And on today's lesson, our focus is on question 4, of which is your animal reproduction, meaning there is a formation of new offsprings through sexual reproduction. Now, by the end of this lesson, learners, you should be able to distinguish between primary and secondary reproductive organs, making up different reproductive systems, right? Secondly, you should be able to state the factors causing sterility and infertility in bulls as well as in cows. Define the concept of oestrus as well as the synchronization as they contribute to sexual reproduction. Identify different artificial mating such as artificial insemination, embryo transfer and nuclear transfer. Identify phases of gestation and parturition. And also you should be able to identify these processes in the exam. Discuss the milk synthesis, milk ejection, and dry period. Now, in the beginning of the year, you guys were introduced to animal reproduction. Remember, this is agriculture. We are dealing with animals, not humans, meaning this reproduction is only focusing on the animal reproduction or the sexual reproduction of farm animals. How do farm animals reproduce? Now let us look at your question 4, of which is your animal reproduction. But firstly, before I even begin with my lesson or my today's lesson, please take note that question 4 is out of 35 marks. It is out of 35 marks, and all the concept or all the content is covered based on reproduction. It is covered in question 4. Now, when it comes to your question 4, that is out of 35 marks, this is what you should know. Firstly, you need to understand the definition of animal reproduction, where it is the formation of new offsprings through sexual and asexual. There is a formation of new offsprings through sexual and asexual. But because we are dealing with animals, this reproduction will only occur through sexual reproduction, meaning we are excluding asexual reproduction. Meaning for these farm animals to reproduce, they reproduce through sexual reproduction. Now, for sexual reproduction to occur, you need to understand that we need 2 farm animals. One animal has to be a male and another one has to be a female. These farm animals, they are reproducing through sexual reproduction. There is a formation of new offsprings. For animal reproduction to occur, we need a male and a female. And from these farm animals, a male has to donate with a male reproductive system, and a female has to donate with a female reproductive system. And these reproductive systems, you should understand that they are made up of different organs, or each reproductive system is made up of different organs. For an example, A male reproductive system is made up of different organs. A female reproductive system is made up of different organs, meaning when these organs combine, they form a system. Meaning a system or a single system is made up of different organs. Some of these organs, they play a direct role, and some they play an indirect role towards sexual reproduction. Now, these organs are divided into two. Whether an organ is making up a male reproductive system or making up a female reproductive system. There are two different organs making up these reproductive systems. One, we have the primary organs, meaning some organs are referred to as being the primary organs. Secondly, some are referred to as the secondary organs. Always remember that each organ plays a role towards sexual reproduction or animal reproduction, or through the formation or towards the formation of new offsprings. And also, when it comes to animal reproduction, always remember that we are not only forming the new offsprings, but we are forming offsprings that will have superior characteristics or desirable characteristics or favorable characteristics. Animals that will produce high milk production, produce high meat production, produce high eggs production, that will be resistant to diseases, be able to adapt to different environmental conditions. Now, let us start with our male reproductive system. We said for a sexual reproduction, our reproduction to occur, we need two reproductive systems, a male reproductive system and a female reproductive system. And each system is made up of different organs. Some of these organs are referred to as being primary, some are referred to as being secondary. Now, let us start with our male reproductive system. Now, our male reproductive system, as I've already mentioned, that it is made up of organs, and these organs are different. One organ has to be the primary, and other organs has to be the secondary organs. Now, for an organ to be referred to as a primary organ, it has to produce the male sex cells, or the sperm cells, or the male gamete. For a primary organ, or for an organ to be referred to or regarded as a primary organ, when it comes to males, it has to produce a sperm cell or the sperm cells, also referred to as the male sex cells, also referred to as the male gamete. Or it has to produce a hormone known as testosterone. Now, our primary organ or our male primary organ, it is known as the testis. Why do we refer testes as the primary organs? Number one, they produce the sperm cells. Secondly, they also contribute or produce a hormone known as testosterone that controls the production of sperm cells and other things in the reproductive system. Now, our primary organ, it is the testis. And these testes are made up of seminiferous tubules. And in these seminiferous tubules, we find two cells. One of the cells has to be the Leydig cell, and the second one has to be the Sertoli cell. The function of the Leydig cell, it is to produce the hormone testosterone. And the Sertoli cell, their function, it is to nourish the developing sperm or to provide the nutrients for the sperm cells. or for the sperm cells, yes, or the spermatids. The primary organ produces hormone testosterone and sperm cells. Now, these testes are made up of seminiferous tubules with different cells. One cell or cells known as the Leydig cells, and the other ones are known as the Sertoli cells. Leydig, they produce the hormone testosterone, and the second one, of which is the Sertoli cells, they produce or they nourish the developing sperm cells or provide nutrients for the sperm cells. Because the sperm cells, they also require nutrients for development. Now we are done with your primary organ that contributes towards animal reproduction. Now, as I've already mentioned, that number one, we have the primary organ known as the testis. This is where we find our testes. And these testes are known, or they are made up of seminiferous tubules. Meaning the testes play a direct role when it comes to reproduction. Why? Because they produce the sperm cells, of which these sperm cells will combine with the egg cells to form a diploid zygote that will develop into an embryo, or that will develop into a new offspring or an actual offspring. Now, apart from having primary organs, you need to also to understand that a male reproductive system is also made up of the secondary organs. And we can conclude by saying secondary organs, they play an indirect role towards animal reproduction. How so? Because some of these organs, they contribute to transportation, some storage, some maturation. Now, let's take a look at these secondary organs. Now, in the male reproductive organ, the secondary organs we can name the epididymis or epididymis. Secondly, vas deferens, also known as a sperm duct. Thirdly, the urethra, followed by the penis, as well as the scrotum. So these are the organs that plays the indirect role towards animal reproduction. Now, where do we find the epididymis or epididymis? Now, this is where we find our epididymis. And the function of these secondary organs, they are responsible for maturation of sperm cells, responsible for the temporary storage of sperm cells, also responsible for the maturation of sperm cells. Meaning, when we are producing or when animals produce sperm cells in the testes, they are still immature. But once they reach the epididymis, that is when they will reach maturity stage. That is where they will mature. And secondly, we have our vas deferens. Remember I said the vas deferens is also referred to as the sperm duct. Now, what's the function of this vas deferens? Because you need to understand and you need to know for the examination, you need to understand each and every function of each organ, or each function or every function of each organ, whether primary or secondary. Now, where do we find our vas deferens? Now, this is our vas deferens, also known as the sperm duct. Now, what is the function of the vas deferens? It is to transport the sperm cells, meaning the sperm cells, they move from epididymis to the vas deferens, also known as the sperm duct, of which when they reach this point, they will be mixed with the accessory glands. but we will still discuss the accessory glands. Now, thirdly, we have the urethra. Remember, we are still on the secondary organs. Now, where do we find our urethra? This is the urethra. Now, the function of the urethra, it is to transport urine from the bladder. Secondly, to transport the semen. Now, what is the semen? Remember I said, when the sperm cells reach this point, they will be mixed with the accessory glands, or the secretion, not the accessory gland, but the secretion from accessory glands. Accessory glands, we can name seminal vesicles, prostate gland, as well as the corpus gland. And these glands are responsible for producing secretions. Now, when the sperm cells combine with this secretion from accessory gland, a semen will be formed, meaning the urethra will not be transporting the sperm cells, but it will be transporting the semen. Why? Because the sperm cells are now combined with the secretion from accessory gland. And the second function, do not forget, it is to transport urine from the bladder. That is the function of the urethra. Now, another accessory gland, we can name the penis. Now, the function of the penis, it is responsible for copulation or penetration. Meaning, during natural mating or sexual reproduction, a male and a female need to mate sexually. And there's going to be a penetration that is taking place. And the penetration is facilitated by the penis. The penetration is also known as the copulation. And it also plays a role in the deposition of the semen in the vagina. Now, another or the last secondary organ, we can name the scrotum. Now, where do we find the scrotum? Right here, a sac-like structure, a bag-like structure that protects the testis, that regulates the temperature. And the temperature has to be 2 degrees lower than the normal body temperature. Meaning, if the normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius, the temperature in the testis should be 35 degrees Celsius. And how do scrotum conduct this function? When the temperature is low, it contracts, so it can regulate the temperature. When the temperature is high, it relaxes, so it can also maintain the temperature. Why is it important to maintain and regulate the temperature? So the sperm cells cannot denature, or the sperm cells cannot die. They cannot be killed. So these are the organs making up a male reproductive system. Now, I mentioned that after the sperm cell has been transported by the vas deferens or the sperm duct, it has to combine with the secretion from accessory gland. Now, where do we find these accessory gland? Number one, we have the seminal vesicle. This is the seminal vesicle that is in pairs, right? Followed by the prostate gland, followed by the corpus gland. And another term for corpus gland is also referred to as a bulbourethra. So you need to keep that in mind for the examination and while you are preparing for the examination. That another term for corpus gland is also known as the bulbourethra. Now, these glands are responsible for producing secretions. And these secretions plays a role towards sexual reproduction. Now, let's start with our seminal vesicle. Now, before I even begin explaining about the seminal vesicle, to each and every accessory organ, you need to understand the function and you should be able to identify them for the exam. You should be able to identify seminal vesicle, a prostate gland, or a corpus gland. Now, the functions of the seminal vesicle as the gland that produces the secretion, it is to nourish the sperm cell, meaning it provides the nutrients. Remember before we said Sertoli cells are responsible for the nourishment. But now, when the sperm cell is being transported across the male reproductive system, the seminal vesicle is responsible for the nourishment, is responsible for the provision of nutrients, feeding these sperm cells. Secondly, it is responsible for correcting the pH. The pH of the semen or the pH of the sperm cells or the semen has to be slightly alkaline, not acidic, because an acidic environment, it kills the sperm cells. They do not survive to an acidic environment. So to be protected from harmful pH, acidic, this seminal vesicle has to produce a secretion that will be responsible for correcting the pH. It is also responsible for osmotic pressure, responsible for osmosis, meaning these sperm cells, they need water. Right. Another accessory gland that you need to understand or know for the examination, it is the prostate gland. Now, what is the function of the prostate gland? Responsible for the characteristic smell. The semen has its unique smell, and the prostate gland is responsible for that smell, responsible for that characteristic smell. And the last gland is the corpus gland. And then we said another term for corpus gland, it is known as the bulbourethra. Very good. Bulbourethra. Now, the function of this bulbourethra, it is responsible for the sperm motility or mobility. The sperm mobility. Meaning it is responsible for the movement of sperm cells. Because these sperm cells, they need to move. They should be able to move so they can reach an ovum. Right? Another function, it is to clean and lubricate the urethra. The urethra has to be lubricated. It has to be watery to facilitate the transportation of sperm cells during ejaculation. The urethra, again, it has to be cleaned so the sperm cells will not be contaminated. So these are your accessory glands that you need to understand for the examination. Remember, you should be able to identify them and provide functions for each or of each accessory gland. Now, spermatogenesis. Remember we said the testes are responsible for the production of sperm cells. Now, how do we produce sperm cells? We produce sperm cells through a process known as spermatogenesis. It is the production of sperm cells. Now, how do we produce sperm cells? There are a lot of cell divisions that are involved in this production of sperm cells. Now, firstly, when we are forming the sperm cells or when the animals are producing sperm cells, the first cell that will be produced is known as the spermatogonia. Now, before we even continue with our spermatogenesis, as the production of sperm cells, you need to understand that when it comes to sexual reproduction, remember we said we need a male and a female. A male contributes 50% and a female contributes with another 50%, making up 100%. Meaning the sperm cells has to be haploid, then the ovum has to be also be haploid. So when these are combined, they will form a diploid zygote. Now, during the formation of sperm cells through spermatogenesis, the spermatogonium, of which is 2N, has to be produced. What does this 2N mean? It simply means that this spermatogonium is a diploid cell, meaning it has to undergo different stages. So it can be, or the number of chromosomes can be reduced, meaning it can be moved from being a diploid into a haploid cell. Now, spermatogonium is the first cell or the first cell that is produced during spermatogenesis. Now, this spermatogonium has to undergo a cell division known as a mitosis. Now, through mitosis, we are forming two identical daughter cells. As it is seen here, two identical daughter cells has been formed. And one of these daughter cells will continue with spermatogenesis. Now, one of the daughter cells will be a primary. One of the daughter cells will be a primary spermatocyte. Meaning when we move from here to here, we move with a cell division known as a mitosis to form two identical daughter cells. And one will undergo or one will continue with spermatogenesis. And that will be the primary spermatocyte. And then the primary spermatocyte is still a diploid cell. The number of chromosomes are still full. They haven't been reduced. Now, this primary spermatocyte to undergo a cell division known as meiosis 1. Now, when a cell is undergoing meiosis or meiosis 1, the number of chromosomes has to be reduced. But before reducing the number of chromosomes, we are forming two secondary spermatocytes. Meaning this 2N is split into two. One will be the secondary spermatocyte and another one will be the secondary spermatocyte. And during that process, the number of chromosomes are halved. Meaning one secondary spermatocyte will be a haploid, another one will also be a haploid. One will contain the half number of chromosomes and another one will contain another half number of chromosomes. And again, each secondary spermatocyte will need to undergo a cell division known as meiosis 2. And when each of the secondary spermatocyte undergo this cell division, of which is meiosis 2, the number of chromosomes are maintained. Meaning we are no longer reducing them, we are maintaining them. And each secondary spermatocyte will form two spermatids. Each secondary spermatocyte will form two spermatids. And remember, we are maintaining the number of chromosomes. Once the secondary spermatocyte undergoes meiosis 2, the number of chromosomes are maintained. We are no longer reducing them. And here we are only forming the spermatids. and each secondary spermatocyte will form two spermatid, meaning at the end of the day, we'll end up having 4 spermatids being formed by the 2 secondary spermatocytes. I just hope you understand that concept. Now, each spermatid will undergo a process known as the spermatogenesis, or they will differentiate into the sperm cells. Meaning at the end of the spermatogenesis, we will form 4 sperm cells. So this is how animals produce the sperm cells. Now, for the examination, you need to also to understand the parts that are making up the sperm cells. You need to understand that each sperm cell is made up of different parts. Firstly, we will have the head. Secondly, the nucleus, and the last one will be the tail. And for your examination, you need to understand each and every role played by these organs or by these parts making up the sperm cell. Now, let us start with the head. You were told that the head has the acrosome, of which is the head cap. The acrosome is made up of enzymes, hyaluronidase. And the function of these enzymes contained by the acrosome, it is to penetrate through the covering layer of the ovum during fertilization. And then secondly, the head also carries the nucleus. Now, the function of this nucleus, it is to carry the genetic material. And please remember or bear in mind that this genetic material is haploid. Remember, we said a male contributes 50% and a female contributes 50%. The genetic material carried by the nucleus is haploid. It has the half number of chromosomes, right? And another piece or another part, it is the nucleus. The function of the nucleus, it is to provide the energy. And this nucleus, it has the mitochondria or mitochondrion, as shown by this picture. And the last part, making up a sperm cell, it is a tail responsible for the propulsion, or it propels the sperm cell. It allows the sperm cell to move towards the ovum. You need to understand that a sperm cell is made up of different parts, and you need to understand each part played, each function or each function of these parts for the examination.